Greetings, beloved ones, and welcome to this third class on understanding energies, the process of purification. In the first class, I talked about cosmology and how energies came into being, how the earth came into being, what we're doing here. In the second class, I talked about 4 principles of purification, and I said that those were not the only principles that one could speak of. And in this class, I'm going to speak about the practice of purification, and some of what I'm going to share with you could be considered additional principles, but I haven't labeled them as such, but you could think of it that way, as subsidiary principles. So there are 7 of them, and because I want to be able to present something to you succinctly so that you remember it, at least for a period of time, short period of time, I'm going to talk a little about each one, and then we're going to have a little discussion here with the people in the room, and before we go on to the second one. And that's because there are 7, and I think if I went through the whole 7, you wouldn't remember what was number 1. So this is so that we can have a more coherent dialogue about them. And then after I speak, we'll have more of a conversation. So, to start out with, most important, is to understand purification is not something you do. You do not do it. You are allowing it. You do certain things in allowing the energy of divine light to work through you. You have to be responsive, but you do not do it. You are not in charge of it. You're in charge of what the portion is of your own effort to adapt to the process of light moving through your body and through your consciousness. It is a divine human undertaking, and the primary action of purification is a divine action. This has to be remembered because the things I'm going to talk about now are about on the human level, but they're on the human level to facilitate the process, not to activate it. You do not do it. It happens through divine participation, and that needs to be remembered all of the time. You are in a divine envelope, context, interaction, partnership, anything you would like to call it. It has to be viewed that way. You are not in charge of it. You're in charge of your response to it, but you don't initiate it. All right, so now we'll go to the first of my 7, I don't know what to call them, smaller principles. The first one, and beloveds, this is based on my years of experience, talking about this, witnessing it, dealing with it in all kinds of ways. So the first one, number 1, it sounds like a countdown for popular music. We're getting going from 7 to 1 on the hit parade. The first one has to do with the need to not make any comparisons with anybody about anything related to purification. You cannot compare yourself to anybody else ever, because nobody has your energy body. And because they don't have your energy body with your karma, your karmic needs in that energy body, whatever they say about it is going to be completely different than what you have to say. So the idea of comparing notes about the details of what you're going to, of course you can share with somebody on the level of companionship, you know, that people are dedicating themselves to a process with the divine. You can always share that, and you can share hope, and you can share prayers, but nobody has your energy body, and therefore the process has to be different for you. The content will be different, the intensity will be different, the way it manifests will be different, how long it takes will be different, all of that. So I hope that you can let go of that, because comparing yourself to someone else who seems to be doing better faster, making more progress, experiencing more light. What else do we say? I think that covers it. They're making more progress, and you, anyone, I'm sort of stuck laboring month after month and year after year, and look at them, whoever them is, they're doing just fine. Why don't I have their purification? So you can't do that. It's completely invalid to make that kind of comparison, which means that you have to accept being solitary in a certain way. You have to accept that only you really know what you're going through. Only you. You can describe it to someone else, but they're going to hear your words without the depth of your experience, because they can't know. They can't know what you experience. It has no relationship to what they're experiencing in its detail of how energy moves. So there's a certain solitariness and a certain strength of purpose that is needed for you to know that you can hold something with God, and that you don't need to compare purification processes with others. This is very important, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be with other people who are also endeavoring to transform and to change themselves and to align with light. But nobody is going to know the depth of what you go through and experience, both positive and negative, besides you. Okay, that's my principle number one, or sub-principle number one. When you devote yourself to a spiritual path, just by virtue of your intention, you start taking in more light. It may not be huge, but you start taking in more light because you are looking for a relationship with the divine reality, with spiritual reality. That alone makes a difference. When you become more dedicated or devoted to a spiritual path and you begin to involve yourself more with the practice, then you take in more light, because your own intensity of devotion and intention makes more energy move through you and transform you. There's a reciprocity about how much you're involved or engaged and what comes back to you. So what happens when you take in more light is that you become more sensitive energetically to all kinds of things. You, generally speaking, know more clearly when you're with people, places, circumstances that have more light in them, and when you're with energies that feel the opposite of that. You don't have to have a name for those energies. You could say, well, it just felt very difficult to be in the room with people, or I felt uncomfortable. You wouldn't necessarily know what it is that you are responding to, but you would know that something in the environment is affecting you. And if you have gotten to the place where you can use the vocabulary of energy, then you would say, there's some energy here that feels uncomfortable to my body. So that happens as a result of taking in more light and developing more sensitivity to everything, plus and minus, good and bad, light and not light. It's everything. And it's part of the transformation process to move towards that awareness, but not to get lost in the porousness of taking in energy. There is a period of time for many people, not everybody, but many people, where the sense of overly reacting to energies that are around is problematic. And then you have to know or consider ways of limiting what your access or your exposure is to those difficulties. And the ways of dealing with that are varied depending on your circumstances. But that's not the end point. That's a midway point, and maybe even it's a beginning point. It's somewhere between the beginning and the middle, or around the middle, because the end point is to have a strength of energy, of light in your own body, so that you are no longer porous. So you're filled with an energy that's no longer taking in anything, because it's complete in itself. It doesn't make you solid in the way that you were solid before you embarked upon a spiritual journey, but it makes you more sturdy in the way of remaining in your own energy field. So the progression is of taking in light, becoming more sensitive, having to learn how to deal with energies that are not comfortable for your body, and having trust that your body is moving in the direction of a strengthened energy field, so that it's no longer going to be problematic for you to be someplace, you know? All right, that is the preface to what I'm about to say. Because we, now having taken in more light, can distinguish what feels light-filled and comfortable, or peaceful, or happy, and what feels dark and penetrating and difficult, we get into the difficulty of thinking that the energy that we're taking in is the person that's emitting it. This is a big problem in the purification process, to understand that energy and personhood are two different things. A person is not responsible for what their body is exuding. I don't eat garlic, but you can imagine eating garlic. And you would be with somebody and you would know that they were, through the pores of their skin, had eaten garlic, because it comes out through their skin. Same thing with energy. Energy comes out of the body independently of whether a person's intending it. The person is responsible for their behavior, but they're not responsible for what their body is doing that they know nothing about. And that is a very important criteria, because if you think that the person is the energy, then you can walk around feeling critical and judgmental of many things that don't warrant your judgment, because you're mixing up the energy and the person. And they are two different things. A person is held accountable for their actions, which they can change or not change, for the words that come out of their mouth, which they can speak or not speak, and for their general attitudes towards life as they express themselves towards you. They can't be responsible for the purification of their body in the same way. So if you run into the problem of being with people and you start feeling judgmental about relationships, think again, because the judgment is not a good way of coping with energetic porousness. Judgment makes your heart close down. Judgment makes your relationships more limited, because who can you be with except those who are not emitting energies that you are having difficulty with? You know, you divide up the world into those people that you can tolerate being with, but that's not the point. The point is to open your heart, not close it, and to find a way of dealing with the fact that you've become more sensitive. And there are all kinds of ways, but mainly what you need to do is to strengthen the light inside you. But in addition to that, because there's a time factor involved, sometimes you need to take yourself out of the situation. Sometimes you need to rest for long periods of time. Sometimes you need to walk in the woods to recover. Sometimes you need to put on some music that changes your energy. These are all coping mechanisms, and they don't necessarily involve judgment. They're just ways of dealing with energetic porousness, and you need to find the one that fits your circumstances. But if you find yourself becoming judgmental about somebody whose energy is difficult, you have to change yourself, because you are then validating the reason to be judgmental and closing down your heart. And without your heart, you can't do anything about purification. It doesn't work that way. You can't circumvent your heart. Your heart is central to the process. Love is central to the process. So this is principle number 2. Energies and persons are not the same thing. And as somebody who's becoming more sensitive, you need to let go of judgment of anything that is happening through the body and is not intended through the words or the actions of another.